video. My name is Sylvie Clappe and I work as a statistician for the Ecosystem Accounts Division at the Central Statistics Office. Today I will briefly talk you through the Frontier publication Ecosystem Accounts Peatlands and Heathens 2018 that we have developed over the past few months. Well, first you might wonder, why did we report on peatlands and heathlands? Well, because both ecosystems are a topic of very high interest in Ireland, as it is shown by all the different policies that has been developed since 2015. For example, the National Peatland Strategy, but also Biodiversity Action Plan and Peatlands Climate Action Scheme, both launched quite recently by Bord na Móna. In this publication, we answer 4 questions. First, how to define peatlands and heathenans, and this is not an easy task. Then, where are they in Ireland? What is their condition? And finally, what is the story behind all the restoration and rehabilitation works we keep hearing about? Well, let me start first with some basic definitions and concepts on peatlands and heathenans so that we all know what we're talking about. Peatlands are wetlands where peat soil occurs naturally. Peat soil has 2 main characteristics. First, obviously, the presence of peat, which is the accumulation of dead or decaying organic material under water saturation condition. And then, this is really important, the depth of peat, which has to be at least 45 centimeters on undrained land and 30 centimeters on drained land. In Ireland, peatlands can be broadly divided into 2 main categories. First, bogs, under which you will find raised bogs, Atlantic blanket bogs, and also mountain blanket bogs. And then, fens, under which you will find poor and rich fens, but also transition meres and quacking bogs. I will come back to this terminology a lot during this presentation, so don't worry if you don't catch it the first time. Heathenans, on the other hand, are habitats with low-growing vegetation such as heather. We have 3 types of heathlands in Ireland: dry heath, wet heath, and mountain heath. Well, perfect. But why did we choose to report on peatlands and heathlands together and not separately? Well, because as you may have seen in all the pictures I showed you of peatlands and heathlands, both ecosystems are quite similar in terms of structure. They often form complex mosaics together, which makes them difficult to distinguish. This similarity of structure also reflects similarities of functions, because both ecosystems provide similar goods and services. For example, they are both habitats for biodiversity, and they both have a role in climate regulation. Now that we're all clear about what is a peatland and what is a heathland, where are they in Ireland? To answer this question, we used 2 data sets that I will explain to you now. First, we used the Corinne Land Cover 2018 data, which are produced by the Environmental Protection Agency, but which are also embedded in a European program called Copernicus. Corinne offers data sets on, as you can see here, land cover, but also land cover change at national level for different years and for different European countries. 2 classes of Corinne are of relevance when we map peatlands and heathenans: peat bogs and moors and heathlands. If we come back to all the different types of peatlands and heathenans I showed you earlier, the categories under each of the classes are these ones. As you can see here, heathenans in Ireland are really well represented by the class moors and heathenans. But peat bogs only includes raised bogs, mountain and Atlantic blanket bogs, and quacking bogs. We used Corinne to have a broad national distribution of peatlands and heathenans. But as you may have noticed, it doesn't allow a real breakdown of all the different types of peatlands and heathenans. And this is why we also use what I call Article 17 data. These data are reported by the National Parks and Wildlife Services every 6 years to the European Commission under the Article 17 of EU Habitats Directive for the conservation and the protection of habitats and species. The habitats and species targeted by the EU Habitats Directive are called Annex 1 habitat and species because they are listed under Annex 1 of the EU Habitats Directive. That is that simple. Annex 1 habitats for peatlands and heathlands includes all the types of peatlands and heathlands that I showed you earlier, except poor fens. In practice, however, some of them have been renamed. For example, mountain heath are now alpine and subalpine heath. Raised bogs are active and degraded raised bogs, and ridge fens are cladium and alkaline fens. So in summary, we used two different data sets. Firstly, Corinne, to have a broad national distribution of peatlands and heathenans, using the peat bogs and moors and heathlands classes. And second, Article 17 data to have the national distribution of Annex 1 habitats for peatlands and heathlands. Well, that's really great, but why didn't we use just Article 17 data, you might wonder, because they present the level of detail that we require. Well, because they are survey-based. So it means that at a particular location, if a habitat is not reported, it means that either this habitat is indeed not at this particular location, or that this location hasn't been sampled. And this is why we need Corinne land cover data, because we need to be sure that we have a national coverage. Moreover, it also offers a comparison between years, different European countries, and also different land cover types. And this is really important when we will need to compare between different ecosystem accounts. Okay, now that we all agree about the definition of peatlands and heathlands and what type of data set we used, let's see where both ecosystems are in Ireland. Based on Corinne land cover data, peat bogs and moors and heathlands covered almost 16% of Ireland in 2018. As you can see on this map, they are mainly located along the west coast, in the Midlands, but also in the Wicklow Mountains. Among the 16%, almost 14% were peat bogs, while less than 2% were moors and heathlands. At county level now, almost 70% of peat bogs occurred in Donegal, Galway, Mayo, and Kerry, while almost 70% of moors and heathlands occurred in Donegal, Kerry, Cork, and Wicklow. Let's now have a look more precisely at all the types of peatlands and heathlands that I described you earlier using the Article 17 data. If we look at the spatial distribution of Annex 1 habitats for peatlands and heathlands in 2019, you can see that it is broadly similar to the one that we observed with Corinne. If we look at peatlands first, you can see that blanket bogs are mostly located along the west coast and in the Wicklow Mountains, while raised bogs and fens are mostly located in the Midlands. For the heathlands, the story is quite different because the three types of heathlands are mostly located along the west coast and in the Wicklow Mountains, but seem to be rather absent of the Midlands. Overall, peatlands and heathlands habitats covered 8% of Ireland in 2019, and this is why we need Corinne land cover data. If we look more precisely at the total area of each habitat, you can see that the largest habitats are blanket bogs for peatlands, but also wet heath and dry heath for heathlands. So now that we know where they are, let's determine if they are in good or bad condition. As you may have seen on all the different pictures that I showed you of peatlands and heathlands, water is an essential characteristic for both ecosystems to function properly and provide goods and services. However, human activities such as peat production or agriculture tend to drain this water, and this is why land use might be a good proxy for condition. Using Corinne land cover data, the largest land use of peat bogs and moors and heathlands in 2018 is agriculture, mostly through extensive grazing in common areas. The two next largest land use are peat production at almost 5% and forestry at more than 2%. Peat bogs and moors heathlands used by human activities are the most likely to be found in bad condition. However, please note that further methodological developments are needed to draw a clear link between land use and condition to have a better conclusion. And this is why we also report the conservation status of Annex 1 habitats for peatlands and heathenans using Article 17 data in 2019. The National Parks and Wildlife Service, in addition to report the spatial extent of Annex 1 habitats, also report their conservation status along with the short-term trend calculated over the past 12 years. The conservation status is a really good proxy for condition because it includes an assessment of the habitat's spatial extent, range, and structure and functions. If we first look at the conservation status, you can see that it is mostly bad for heathenans and peatlands. The short-term trend, however, is a different story. You can see that for heathenans, it is mainly equally split between deteriorating, stable, and improving, but it is mainly deteriorating for peatlands. So the overall conservation status for peatlands and heathenans is mainly bad and deteriorating. And this is what leads us to the work of restoration and rehabilitation of peatlands. Before going any further, I really need you to understand the difference between restoration and rehabilitation. Restoration is the process to assist the recovery by human interventions of degraded peatlands or drained peatlands to active peatlands, which will provide goods and services that are similar or equal to natural peatlands. Rehabilitation, on the other hand, refers more specifically to former peat production areas. These areas have often changed drastically from natural peatlands. And this is why usually other types of habitats developed instead, such as shrublands or woodlands. The goods and services provided by these new ecosystems may not be equal to the goods and services that are provided by natural peatlands. And this is the crucial difference between restoration and rehabilitation. In one case, we go back to an active peatland. In the other case, it is not necessarily the case. Let's now have a look at the different numbers for restoration projects. Up to 2015, as you can see here, more than 7,000 hectares of peatlands have undergone restoration projects. The work has mainly been done by European projects called EU Life, but also the National Parks and Wildlife Service. Between 2016 and 2020, just over 5,000 hectares have been through restoration programs, mainly through European projects, but also internal Bordnamona projects. Between 2021 and 2025, and this is provisional, it is expected that more than 9,000 hectares of peatlands will undergo restoration programs. The work will mainly be done by National Parks and Wildlife Service. If we now have a look at the rehabilitation that has been done by Bordnamona only, you can see that up to 2020, more than 20,000 hectares of peatlands have undergone rehabilitation projects. Between 2021 and 2025, and this is provisional, it is expected that 33,000 hectares will undergo rehabilitation projects. And this has been announced by Bordnamona under the Peatlands Climate Action Scheme lately. This now ends my presentation, and I really thank you for listening to me with such an attention. If you have any query, please come back to ecosystems@cso.ie. We'll be really pleased to answer any of them.